Today's Trash or Treasure, we're going to take a look at the first and second generation of the Peavey Tl-5 series. So we have a little bit of a theme going on here since we covered the Sarzo on the first edition of this, but we're back with another 90s era American series Peavey. I thought we might want to take a look at these. I got a little bit of an influx of some older Peavey gear, so we'll go through it. In any case, the TL in the TL series stands for Tim Landers. This was actually, and a lot of people don't know, but a signature series bass just like the Sarzo is. Tim Landers was a well-known jazz and a really prominent session player. He was probably on a number of things that you've listened to. He's played with some really incredible names and really a bassist of more than a little bit of skill. So that says something right away for the TL, and that if he had a hand in designing it and it was a signature instrument, it's worth looking into. Later on, Tim actually had a hand in the Padula Buzz and has, I'm not sure if it's still in production, but had a Padula Sig model as well. So you have two different variations on the TL series. You have Generation 1 and Generation 2. So let's take a look at the basic components of what makes up the TL, and then we'll go and take a look at the differences in between the two of them. So for me, what makes this kind of a standout is the fact that it's body construction that we don't see that much anymore, and that is that it's all maple. It's a neck through the body with maple body sides, flame maple, and then you also had a flame maple neck that had Purple Heart stringers. See it on the back. And this one actually has a nice bit of flame in it. So you have a battery cover back here, square at the back, which is separate from the electronics cavity. And you can also see that on this one, it has the access, just like the Dyna series had, for the trim pot that goes in on the preamp. We'll get into that. You've got a fairly decent set of Schaller style tuners, and you also have the Schaller style roller bridge there. This is the same on the Sarzo, same on a number of the Peavey basses. I believe the Foundation series had them, and so did the Dynabase. And again, as I know I keep repeating it, but because of the similarities, as I mentioned on the Sarzo, you have the kind of cat's eye large fret markers, and you've got that really thick slab ebony fingerboard, which you don't see as common anymore, and well, especially jet black ebony on its own like that, but much thicker fingerboard. So that's fairly cool. And then this is the core, the body and its construction. Let's take a look at the two differences. And this being the first generation, what you have is the super ferrites. The super ferrites, and we'll check it out in a second, are kind of a single coil type of construction, even though they look like humbuckers. They, to me, sound a little bit kind of the cross point in between a single coil and a humbucker. And then you've got the Dynabase Preamp. Now, this was the same that was in the Sarzo, but the Sarzo uses different pickups that were made specifically for that model. But it's the same preamp, bass, mid, and treble, boost and cut with center points, and you also have an active-passive switch, volume, and blend. Now, in my first review with the Peavey Sarzo, I mentioned that I wasn't too much a fan, and I felt it was a little bit of the failings was the preamp. It's not a total disaster. I mean, neutral, it doesn't sound bad, but I do feel it's the weakest part of the electronics components. The main part being the mids. I think the mids just boost and cut a rather ugly part, and I don't find it that useful. The bass and treble can be useful, though, and let's just take a listen. So let's check this out in passive mode. Everything's set flat, and the preamp does have center detents in the pots. Good, solid, fairly warm sound. The interesting thing to me is that I don't hear as much of a tonal difference when I turn it to active it's more of just kind of like somebody took a little bit of the blanket off the sound. So a lot of times when I switch to having a preamp engaged, you hear an actual coloration difference. This I don't. I just hear like a hi-fi version of the original sound, which I kind of feel like that's the best way to go. So it's basically like, somebody added a lot of presence. But again, my complaints with the preamp on the Sarzo, which are present in here again too, are just that the mid isn't that functional. And while you can make good adjustments with the bass and treble, they seem to overlap in frequency a bit, in that boosting the treble sounds almost exactly like cutting the bass. So it's almost like you could just have one tone knob and it would sound the same. But to hear my major complaint on it, boosting the mids, just this really honking, horrible kind of tone, in my opinion. Then dialing them out, just not good. I don't know. I can't find much use for those two frequencies in boost or cut. Treble up. And off gives you a pretty wide range. You can go from dead mud all the way up to insane presence. So just a little bit of boost or cut could be, a lot of difference. And that's kind of handy to have on board, maybe an overly bright cabinet or something like that. Bass, same type of effect. Oh, not bad. Again, to me, you could leave the mids out and just use the bass and treble and be pretty good there. But I still find that it has a bit more of an older school sound gone active. It doesn't suddenly become, to me, overly hi-fi, that kind of thing. But like I said in the Sarzo video, I don't find the Dynabase Preamp to be that great, but it's not a detriment. It's not like you have to use it if you don't want to. Set with everything at center detent, it's pretty good, and I don't find that it robs from the signal. Kicking it into active, for me, is probably the way I would go. I find that's where the bass really kind of shines and shows its detail. So I'll just dial it in at the rig and leave this out of the equation, I think. So let's take a look at Generation 2. Now, before we go into the differences here, I wanted to show something that is similar that I forgot to mention when going over the body core on the Series 1. Something else you don't see quite as much is having kind of a concave top is, a pretty standard feature or something you can get a lot anymore. But you rarely these days see concave bodies having an actual curvature through the back. These do have that. They've got that kind of sink that goes through it. It's very, it's a gentle curve, but very Spectre-ish. I find this in a way to have some of those Spectre-ish type of things, just in, having an all maple bass neck through and that curvature. There's a lot of similarities there. The other part of it being is how the neck is. The neck is slim, but slim in a way that, again, isn't as, kind of prominent or popular now. C-shapes seem to be the big deal. I prefer a C-shape myself a little bit, but this is a D in that it has a little bit of a hump, like right here and right here. So on both sides, just outside where the stringers are, you're going to have a little bit of a shoulder. But the neck is fairly slender and it's very flat. So you've got this kind of almost a U shape on it. So if you like a slender neck, these could be your beast here. But it's slender in that it's not a C profile. It's dead flat and then more of a D. So again, there's the commonalities. But in this one, what we have different is pretty much right all in here. You have a different bridge. They went back to a more standard Fender style, just traditional vintage style bridge there. Now the real major difference is going to be at the pickups. You have the VFL series. These have kind of a curved radius, which I thought was kind of cool actually, in that if you set them upright and you like the position close, to the strings. You almost use these as a ramp going across. But these are very different from the super ferrites, and we'll get into that in a minute. But then they also changed the preamp in that this is active all the time. This is a much more hi-fi kind of tuned bass. So you have volume, blend, then you've got stacked bass and treble, then kind of the exact opposite of the preamp on Series 1 is a much more useful mid in that you have a mid amount and then you have a sweep in the frequency. So you can actually pick it and boost and cut. So, I find that a much more useful option. So let's make sure we're centered everything here. And so basic setup, flat, and again, no active or passive switch on this one. And for me on this one, it's the same body core, so it should more than a usable tight functioning B string. Sounds great. But yeah, very different. So let's check out what happens. Treble adds a lot more bite to it. Bass. That can get out of control real quick. And those to me are fairly usable frequencies. Now again, when we get to the mids, I haven't done much to it. As soon as I start sweeping, and cut. So a much wider selection of what you can get out of it. This to me is definitely the better preamp of the two. So first or second generation really isn't going to make that much difference to most people, just based on what kind of bass you want. If you want something that's active all the time, and has that, definitely has more brightness and presence than the super ferrites have in passive mode, but again, you can get close with active. But this one, it's definitely the more modern sounding of the two. I consider the first series to have kind of a older school sound that's brought a little modern with the addition of the preamp, and then this one is just all modern. You're really going to get that very aggressive, tight, clear, super clean type of sound out of it. That's basically the two differences between them. Again, the bodies are the same, they feel the same, all the same workmanship, and based off of the same core. So I took both of these kind of to the dressing table, and I looked at the fretwork, I looked at the bridge and the construction. I actually took the bridges off, kind of checked them out to see, make sure they weren't kind of pot metal copies, that type of thing. And my cons on it would be the preamp on the first series, definitely. I brought that up a couple of times. On the second series, the proximity to the strings with the pickups is hypersensitive. And I'm not sure how many people are going to know that when they first grab one of these. So that to me is almost a little bit of a downside in that the tone can vary wildly, even in small adjustments. But definitely the better preamp, and the hardware change didn't really bother me. I actually prefer the shallow style roller bridge, but it functions, it works, and how often do you really mess with the bridge after you set it up? Put this together with neck through construction. It's got, a nice heel pulled back away from where you would get all the way into the body. You actually can access almost all the way up to the top fairly easily. Flame maple. If you can find these in good condition, I've seen them go anywhere from mid-4 to mid-6, depending on with the case, the condition, that type of thing. At that price point, and for what you're getting on these, I think it's an absolute steal. I'm really uncovering these American Peaveys from the past, and although they're getting more popular and coming up, you can still find them. And I mean, these things were, did some research on the past prices, and they were even like $250, $300 like 8 years ago, something like that, which is just criminal. But when you figure that a good neck through bass with these type of appointments and everything is easily running about $1,500 now, minimum. Getting one of these and scoring it for an average of 5 with a hard shell case, that's absolute treasure. That's going to have to be the verdict on this one. So again, Series 1 and Series 2, it's more a sense of taste than better or worse. They are based off of the same body core, and what there isn't one better or worse. It's just which electronics package pretty much you feel better suits you. In an ideal world, I would take the preamp out of this one and add it to the Super Ferrites. That to me is the perfect combination, I think. Nothing wrong with the VFLs though. Definitely good pickups. There's just something, a little bit of the flavor in the Super Ferrites that kind of caught my ear. And I think they do well with this package. But so I'd love to hear from any of you that have one of these or have considered them or looked at them. What are your thoughts on it? Have you used them for a long time? And have there been any issues that have come up that maybe over a long time kind of poke their head up? And have you been in the market and did you score one at a good price? Definitely be curious. But for episode 2, we've gotten pretty lucky and there's another massive winner. So let's see if this video drives the price up on the market. And so happy hunting. Thanks for checking it out. I'll see you down in the comments. I'll see you on the next one.